Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Karen Brown, and it is my distinct honor to introduce to you a longtime, dear, personal friend of mine, the President of National Organization on Disability, Carol Glazer.
So you are all the diehards here. You braved the elements to get over, and we thank you for it. It's great to see you all. And we're thrilled to be here with our friends and colleagues at the Ford Foundation. And thank you. As host, you have not only built a beautiful building here, but you've built an accessible building here. And that's very special. I want to start by, the topic, bridging the trust gap. Very important topic for us, and I'll try to tell you why, but I'm sure you'll hear more from our speakers. And of course, as usual, we want you to go back to your offices with some practical wisdom about how to build trust in the workplace. I wanted to thank a couple of my board members who won't be speaking. Two of them will. Two others won't. Luke Visconti, who is a chairman, recently stepped up to the role as chair with Carolyn Johnson, a CEO of Diversity, Inc., vice chairman of our board. I don't see Brad Hopton, tax partner at PwC, who should be here a little bit later. I have 21 bosses. That's the size of our board. Each one of them is better than the next. It's a fantastic board. Most people would agree in any sector. We work hard, we play hard. I think we have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration across the board. So today's event could be our most important in this year. We're here to talk about trust, and I want to tell you a few reasons why we think trust is such an important part of building a diverse workforce with people with disabilities. Earlier this year, colleagues and I visited 30 companies on a listening tour. And we wanted to understand what was on your minds, what makes you lose sleep at night. By the way, if you are D&I leaders, diversity and inclusion leaders here today, would you mind raising your hands, just so we know who we're talking to? Folks from the nonprofit sector, sourcing agencies, other folks from government, other in corporate America. Terrific. We wanted to understand the challenges that companies are facing as they try to build a more diverse workforce that includes people with disabilities. We want to understand what your challenges are, what makes you lose sleep at night, and how we can help you. We heard three things that were important. One was talent acquisition. Two was digital accessibility, very tough, very expensive. But the third, and what was on everybody's mind, was trying to get their employees with disabilities to be willing to self-identify as having disabilities. There are a whole bunch of reasons for that, not least of which is regulatory requirements on federal contractors that we were actually somewhat active in putting in place in the Obama administration. But that's a 7% workforce goal if you do business with the federal government. And if you look at the data that we've just reported out on from our most recent round of the Disability Employment Tracker, which is tracking the disability inclusion practices of 200 companies, the average rate of self-ID, and these are leading companies who want to take a survey and they want to understand what they're doing and how they can benchmark against each other and do better. The average rate of self-ID of employees with disabilities was 4%. So we're not only a little bit more than halfway only to meeting a regulation that was passed 6 years ago, but we're definitely very short of the overall population of people with disabilities that are in your workforce today, and you just don't know it. Research has shown us, some from the Working Mother Institute, where we helped to inform, a report showed an unexpected result. It was an employee engagement report. It showed that those with visible disabilities in corporate America were happier and more engaged than people with invisible disabilities. Why? We're going to ask a lot of why questions here today. We suspect the reason is that when you have a visible disability, you don't have any choice. You are disclosed, you're out. Therefore, you get the accommodations you need. Therefore, you're more productive. Therefore, you're more happy and engaged. And the corollary is those with invisible disabilities, less happy, less engaged, likely because they're not getting the accommodation they need. We know that engaged employees perform better and they last longer. So it turns out that finding ways to encourage self-ID in your workforce is not just a regulatory matter or a compliance matter. It's a sound retention strategy. Third, high self-ID rates signal to job seekers and consumers that you're an inclusive company. And we know that particularly millennials, the largest growing segment of the workforce, care very much about the ideals and inclusiveness of the companies that they're going to work for. So self-ID is clearly above and beyond compliance with myriad bottom line impacts. And here's one very important piece of data that comes out of our tracker. Of the 200 companies that took the survey, 60% of them are mounting self-ID campaigns. They're expensive. They're trying to boost self-ID rates by mounting these communications campaigns. 50% of them have reported zero increase in self-ID as a result of those campaigns. So a lot of money being spent, and the return is questionable at best. So why aren't these campaigns succeeding? What's amiss? We at NOD believe that the missing link is trust. I want to credit Luke Visconti, who brought this up in a conversation several years ago. He couldn't have been more right then, and he's very right today. Without trust, self-ID campaigns are likely to not only be ineffective, but they're probably and a waste of money, but they could backfire. They could arouse suspicion and mistrust. And in business, we often talk about the relationship of trust between the consumer and a company. But today, we want to talk about an even more sensitive type of trust, and that's between a company and their workforce. And there's perhaps no greater act of workplace trust than for an individual to disclose a disability, to come out, and no better proxy for organizational trust than a good self-ID rate. I can speak to this challenge personally. Several years ago, I was diagnosed with and disclosed my diagnosis of post-traumatic stress, which came as a result of years of taking care of a child with chronic medical issues in and out of the hospital with life-saving surgeries throughout his 27-year life. And I'm president of the National Organization on Disability. So if I was afraid to get the diagnosis and to then admit the diagnosis, one can only imagine how hard it is for people in the regular workforce. Particularly mental health issues, the most stigmatized of all disabilities. So I can tell you from experience, to disclose one's disability is to take a risk, to be vulnerable, to be subject to judgment, and in some cases, to be left behind. But not where there's trust. Trust empowers employees to ask for support and enables leaders and managers to offer it freely. Trust is the bedrock for strong cultures, and it factors in with employees when they're asked to step outside their comfort zones and to take risks. It also factors in with managers when they empower their employees rather than micromanage them. And then finally, with leaders at every level, and you'll hear from some of them today, when people line up behind them in pursuit of shared goals. Trust is the element that allows a leader to be effective in getting people to follow them. So how do we build trust? That's what we're here to unpack today. We're going to take a deep dive into the data. We're going to examine case studies of several terrific companies that have become leaders in this area. And as always, at our Corporate Leadership Council meetings, we very much want you all to go back to your offices with practical wisdom that you can share with your colleagues and do something with starting tomorrow. A few shout outs. I want to thank Adela Ruiz, who's here with us from the Ford Foundation, and she will be helping welcome you to this beautiful space. Doug Conant, CEO of Conant Leadership, former CEO of Campbell's Soup, author of best-selling book, another best-selling book, most certainly on the way. Doug likes to talk about how he's an introvert. He doesn't like people gushing on him, but it's kind of too bad right now because I have the stage. He's an NOD board member extraordinaire, and on a personal level, he's somebody I'm very privileged to call a personal mentor. He's kept me out of trouble in many, many occasions, and I couldn't be more grateful for that. From Edelman Intellectual Property, Executive Director, Tonya Reese, will introduce the Edelman Trust Barometer and how trust is assessed in a corporate setting. And from Eli Lilly Company, Chair of the company's Disability ERG, and Clinical Trial Management Consultant and Inspection Readiness Lead. Wow, that's very impressive. I hope you'll tell us what you do. Okay. Dr. Andrea Sassman will talk about how the company has utilized decades of trust building to achieve a 9% self-ID rate. There's one special friend that I want to acknowledge here today. She's somebody who led this foundation for long enough and effectively enough to have this room named after her. Susan Beresford is an extraordinary leader. She's a personal friend. I'm so glad to be with you here in this room today, Susan. You demonstrated by your extraordinary behavior, by your empathy, by your wisdom, by your humility, and by your courage to back strong and innovative ideas and people before anybody else did. You did it quietly. You too, like Doug, probably don't want to hear me gushing on you, but I really can't help it. There's nobody better to embody all of the principles that we're talking about here today than the folks that are up here and then Susan Beresford. Thank you for coming, Susan. By the way, I wanted to just tell a little anecdote, Susan. I met Roy in the lobby, the security guard. He's been here for 30 years. I said, Roy, tell me about Susan as president of this foundation. He said the following. This is why I know you're here at the right meeting. He said, she made me feel secure in every one of my positions. She always insisted that I call her Susan, but I never could. She was regal. She was approachable. Is Roy here? In fact, I invited him up. He said he might be able to get a break to come over and be here for part of this. Anyway, that's the kind of workforce that Susan Beresford built in this fine institution, and that others who you're going to hear from have done in their respective place. I am supposed now to introduce Michael Stein, another board member and the founder of the Harvard Law School Project on Disability, but I don't think he's arrived yet. I know the traffic's been pretty bad today. So I am very, very pleased to introduce to you. We're moving right to the introduction. Terrific. Thank you, Adela Ruiz from the Ford Foundation.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much, Carol, for that wonderful start to our luncheon today. My name is Adela Ruiz, and I'm from the Office of the President, Darren Walker. I'd like to welcome all of you, specifically thank Carol and Julia from NOD for their incredible work you do and the vision to gather us here today on such an important topic. And I am pleasantly surprised that Susan is also here. She's an inspiration to us all, and I think I speak for all of us at the foundation when I say that we try to live up to the legacy that she left for us. So thank you so much, Susan, for being here. Today is a very special day. We're here to learn about the trust gap and how to make our organizations more inclusive of disabled colleagues. In 2015, our president, Darren Walker, introduced our new strategy, Ford Forward, whose focus was to disrupt inequality. While thousands of organizations reached out in support following this announcement, leaders of the disability community, like Carol, expressed legitimate concern and posed the important question, how can you not acknowledge people with disabilities when you talk about inequality? Far too long, disabled people have been excluded from our workplaces and institutions. And if it's our goal to disrupt inequality in a meaningful way, we must bring and amplify the voices of people with disabilities on that journey. This moment offered us the opportunity to truly look at ourselves and make a change. We started by requiring that every program at Ford dedicate a minimum target of their grant making to organizations led by and serving people with disabilities. In addition, we established the Matching Funds program to highlight creative grant making and convene partner foundations that have been funding disability for a very long time to brainstorm how our whole philanthropic sector could lead on this issue. So where are we now? Since 2015, these changes at Ford have resulted in over $9 million in funding to disability-specific work, that is, organizations or projects primarily focused on disability. And in partnership with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, we've established the President's Council on Disability Inclusion, comprised of 15 foundation presidents committed to also making their foundations more inclusive of disabled people. Together, the President's Council will contribute to an over $10 million participatory fund supporting disability-inclusive organizations side by side with the disability community. In addition to renovating our building that we're all here in and making it completely ADA accessible and welcoming of the disability community, we have hired regularly engaged with experts from the disability community like Carol and the folks at NOD to help us improve our policies, events, and grant making. And this is just the beginning, which is very exciting. Later this year, we hope to formally launch the Disability Justice Fund, as well as our first Ford Disability ERG, and we'll continue designing convenings to uplift a new generation of disabled leaders. We welcome you and are confident that together we can make all of our organizations more inclusive for, and most importantly, with people with disabilities, because more than ever, now at Ford, we acknowledge that there is no equity without everyone. Thank you.